Well, welcome to everyone. I believe it's about time for us to start tonight. Really glad that you're here. If all goes well tonight, the fire alarm will not go off. Those of you who are online last week, that was an abrupt interruption, and I think Nick kind of seamed all that together, but we apologize for that break. But we're glad you all are with us as well. Also, I hope you survived the time change. It looks very late right now already, which makes it feel very sleepy. So we'll try to move things along tonight where we don't drift off. I read something today, I think it was a CBS poll, that said 20% of adults feel like they have some sort of mental episode when the time changes. That the mental well-being just sort of falls apart for a while after it. So I don't know if any of us feel like we're in that category, but hopefully we'll get adjusted to that pretty quickly. Anyway, very glad that you're all here tonight. I want to begin by sharing a story I heard this week. There was a wealthy businessman who was walking along a marina, and he came upon an older gentleman who was sitting there playing with a small child. He assumed it was his grandchild. His fishing boat was moored at the time, and this was the middle of the day. And he was incensed at the fact that this fisherman in the middle of the day was not out catching fish. And so he said to him, "Why aren't you fishing?" And the man said, "Well, I've already caught enough fish for today." He said, "But don't you realize if you got back in that boat and got out there, you could catch more fish. And if you caught more fish, you'd make more money. And if you made more money, then you could buy more boats. You could actually have a fleet eventually. And then you could buy nets and you could catch more fish. And then you would become rich like me." And the guy said, "Well, then what would I do?" And he said, "Well, then you could just sit back and enjoy life." And he said, "What do you think I'm doing right now?" And the point of that is to say that, contentment is one of those things that sometimes is elusive, that we're in search of it, and some folks find it earlier than others, but it does become an issue for how we live it out and how we teach our children to become content with where they are and with what they have at any given point. The word contentment actually comes from Latin roots that mean to be held together, like a cup or a bucket, so that there's a sense of wholeness or completeness there. There are no leaks, there are no cracks where things are getting away from us at that time. Hebrew language also has a word that we tend to hear a lot more, I guess, in the last few weeks, and the word would be shalom. Now, in a very casual sense, shalom would be a greeting. On the streets of Jerusalem, if you were there, someone may say to you shalom, which would be a hello, or in a parting greeting, a goodbye. But that whole concept of shalom is much bigger than that. It also carries this sense of being overall together, everything in place, not just peacefulness, but a wholeness of the experience of the person. We talked last week, I put up the heart, soul, mind, and strength, and we put the fence around it and talked about how we protect that. But shalom is actually where that is. It's this peacefulness, this security that gives a blessing to our heart and soul as we go. I want us to roll back in time just a little bit. It's Christmas Day, 1863. The poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow is actually sitting by himself, musing about things that have happened 2 years preceding this. His wife died tragically in a fire. He has a son who was injured in battle. Less than 6 months earlier, there were 40,000 men killed at Gettysburg. The Civil War is still raging on at the time. And so here he is sitting by himself when he should be with family, celebrating, and sort of lost in his thoughts. And the longer he sits, he hears in the distance bells, Christmas bells on Christmas Day. And as he begins to think about all that's happened, he picks up his pen and he writes these words. And it opens with the verse that we know well, and that is, "I heard the bells on Christmas Day, their old familiar carols play, and wild and sweet the words repeat of peace on earth, goodwill to men. Now, that just sort of captures the moment. But if you go on and look at the whole poem, he talks about the stresses and the tragedies of the war. And then the last two stanzas, he pulls it all together with this sort of epiphany that he has in thinking through all that's gone on. And it says, "And in despair I bowed my head. There is no peace on earth, I said. For hate is strong and mocks the song of peace on earth, goodwill to men. Then pealed the bells, more loud and deep. God is not dead, nor doth he sleep. The wrong shall fail, the right prevail, with peace on earth, goodwill to men." I think there are seasons in our life where we can empathize with Longfellow, and really it wouldn't be too much of a stretch to say that we could do that right now. With all that's going on in the world, all the unsettledness, the conflict, the dissension, the unrest, etc. But it points out the fact, I mean, this is, century plus ago, and there's a universal experience for all of us in the sense that none of us is immune to misfortune. I mean, it's just what it is. It's part of this life. Disease, debt, disappointment, disaster, divorce, depression, the list just goes on and on and on. We don't ask for these things, but they become part of our experience. And our response to those things really determines whether we move toward shalom or whether we move away from it. And Paul addressed this whole issue of contentment in the letter that he wrote to the church that he loved, that he was always so concerned about, the church at Philippi. And he says to them, "Do not be anxious about anything." I guess we could stop right there, couldn't we? Probably spend a whole night just talking about that. "Don't be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace, the shalom of God, which exceeds really anything that we can explain or understand, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." And so the message that's coming out of that is if we choose to believe that God always wants what's best for us, that his word, which Jordan talked about on Sunday, we can trust, it's inspired, that he's going to work everything for our good, that we can love him for his faithfulness, and we can believe that that's constant, then we're going to live with the assurance that the wrong will fail and the right will prevail. And anything less in believing that is less than shalom. The Father and Son tonight in this text are going to give us a little glimpse of what it is to find contentment. But we're going to use this passage in a way that's probably different than what you would expect. The situation that Danny's going to read for us is preceded by moments that are very emotional for Jesus. They're moments that have purpose, but they're peaceful. There's a blessing in these encounters. He has come back to Bethany. He's had dinner with Lazarus and Martha and Mary. He's been celebrated. This is where the perfume is poured on him, and Mary wipes his feet with her hair. And he's already come through the triumphal entry where crowds showed up to affirm him. And he's had that very intimate moment with his apostles where he washed their feet. But it's also the space between that and what he knows is coming. There's fixing to be shortly after this the betrayal in the garden. And then there'll be the scourging, and then there'll be the crucifixion. So these are the bookends that are going to be around what Danny will read for us. So if you're looking to turn, we're in Luke chapter 22 tonight, verses 39 through 46.
Jesus left the city Jerusalem and went to the Mount of Olives. His followers went with him. Jesus went there often. Jesus said to his followers, "Pray that you will not be tempted." Then Jesus went down, or about 50 yards away from them. He kneeled down and prayed, "Father, if it is what you want, then let me not have this cup of suffering. But do what you want, not what I want." Then an angel from heaven appeared. The angel was sent to help Jesus. Jesus was full of pain. He struggled hard in prayer. Sweat dripped from his face like he was bleeding. When Jesus finished praying, he went to his followers, and they were asleep. Their sadness had made them very tired. Jesus said to them, "Why are you sleeping? Get up and pray for strength against temptation."
Thank you, Danny. I'd like for us to think back through this. It's a familiar passage, you know it well. But I think there's a progression, if we just look at this for a minute, in the conversation between Jesus the Son and his Father on how you move from this point of stress to a point of shalom, to a point of contentment. And it begins with an awareness of what's going on around him. And he says, I need you, or I would like for you to think about taking this cup from me. In essence, I know what's coming. It isn't new news to me. But I would still very much like for us to consider that. And in a way, I don't know, some of you have probably taught your children to do this. I hear my grandchildren say it, that they've been told not to say, "I don't want that," or "I don't like that." Instead, they're supposed to say, "That's not my preference." I hear that loudly and clearly right here when Jesus says to his Father, "This is really not my preference. Is there another way that we could do this?" And then actually the scripture that we're familiar with uses the word anguish that comes next. That there is an anxiety that's associated with this, okay, I'm aware of what's happening and it's really revving up inside me, this emotional response. And I need to do something with that. I need to process that in a way that's going to be helpful. And we know that's true because not only does it say anguish, I think it's in the NIV that it says that, but it's demonstrated that he prays so earnestly that we have sweat like drops of blood. That's intense, okay? And then there's a step toward acceptance. And he makes his preference known. It's not my preference, but he says, okay, I accept the fact that this is what it is. And it is what it is because that's what you need it to be. That's what you want it to be. We're sharing this together. So there is an acceptance that we move through at this point. Not my will, but yours. And then the Father doesn't abandon him. I think it's the NIV Luke translation that says the angel came to attend to him. Very reminiscent of the Transfiguration. He goes to the mountain. He needs that vote of confidence going to Jerusalem. This is in his humanity now. And who shows up? But his legacy partners who come and say, yes, we're in this with you. You can do this. We're going to see this through. And we get the same feeling here that he's not abandoned to deal with this, but he senses the presence and believes and accepts the assurance and assistance that he gets. And then there's the final resolve. Okay, this is the way it is. This is the way we're going to do this. This is an okay thing. I can deal with this. And then he steps it up at that point. And he says, you guys, are you with me? Let's get on with it. We have things to do. Let's get awake and move on. There's no pouting about this. It's almost like you're reading currency. In God I trust. Okay. So there is this progression, even here: awareness, anguish, acceptance, assistance, and then resolve, in order to get to a place of contentment, a place of shalom. If we go with that and we accept that's true, then how do we teach our children that? How do we begin to introduce the whole concept of being content when that's not always easy? And I think the first thing we have to do is recognize the fact that it isn't innate. It's not built into the DNA. That contentment or shalom is something that has to be learned, and it's often by experience. Here again, Paul writing to the church in Philippi, for I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I have learned the secret of being content in every situation. So I think it's too much for us to just say, just get over it. Just deal with it. Let's get on with it. There has to be a sense of instruction here, knowing that it does not come just without effort. And it shows up in the fact that, life happens. I mean, who was it? Matt? Who was telling me? Somebody had to stop and help someone who needed their battery jumped on the way to here tonight. And so Ben was the one who did that. And I thought, okay, so we're late, so nobody gets to where they're going. That's it. It happens. We do what we need to do. So we have to sort of get with the program that we can't always control all the circumstances that are there, and we have a choice. We either sulk about it, or we figure out what to do and we move on. And when we do, then there's a sense of contentment about it. How many of you remember seeing this at some point in your growing up? It used to be hanging on the wall in everybody's house, or it was in the Hallmark store on greeting cards. You could just always know that it was there. And it's the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. That is not the whole prayer. I thought this was all there was. This is very passive, sort of. I'm sitting here. Okay, maybe I can do something, maybe I can't. Just help me know the difference. But the whole poem goes on to say this, or prayer says this: living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace, taking as Jesus did the sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender to your will, so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. That suddenly puts those first three lines in a much bigger context whenever you think in terms of the part that we usually don't see is loaded with verbs, with active movement. Live, enjoy, accept, take, trust. There is involvement in that in order to step into this world of serenity or contentment or shalom, whichever word or concept that you want to use. How do we, approach that? Because this is all very nice, and that's really what we would like for our kids to really hang on to. But there's a whole world out there that's telling them exactly the opposite, that this is not what you do. So I want us to take just a minute, and I think we've got time to do this tonight. Let's do a little whiteboard for just a moment here. What are the things that keep our kids from being content? Now, we don't even have to do that. What are the things that keep us from being content? We'll just randomly make a list here. Okay. Pardon? Oh, okay. I'm sorry? Fear of missing out? I think this has made every list that we put on the whiteboard this whole semester. What else can you, pardon? Anything else?
Kind of like guilt or shame.
Okay. Can you think of anything else?
Failure.
True failure or feeling like failure? Anyway, yeah, and that can almost tie in several places down through there. Pain? Pain? Okay. That's a pretty good list. I mean, that's enough to make any of us stressed. And if you look at that list and you think your children are growing up in the midst of that, how are they dealing with this? How did we deal with this as a child? Was it this intense? Is that the same list that would have been on that board 30 years ago, 40 years ago, as we look through it? I think we're probably going to hit all of these here in just a minute. But one of the things that is pervasive, but it's subtle, is this more temptation. The temptation to always want more or to feel like we need more. If you think about advertisements, whether it's on television, whether it's on radio, whether it's on social media as far as iPads or computers or whatever, billboards, isn't the appeal always that our life is not complete without, and then you fill in the blank, whatever it is. Now sometimes you can just scroll right on past that if it doesn't have an appeal to you. But if there's something that pops up that is of particular interest, it now begins to unleash some of these emotions that you think, well, yeah, you're right. You know, I think this could happen, or I'd feel better if I had that, or we begin to dwell on that. But there's this false assumption that shalom is found in accumulating things, that more will always fill this need. But, you know, I think if we polled everybody here, we've all been there and done that, and it never does. You know, having more never satisfies or never gets us on the train to shalom. We get left in the station every time with that. It's almost like buying a lottery ticket. You go in and you buy it, and you know statistically there is no way on earth that you're going to win that lottery. Even when you buy that ticket, you know that. But there's this little inkling, this little imp of the perverse that's in your head that says, but maybe this time, maybe this time. So we buy it, and we don't win it, all right? And then we have this conflicting feeling because there's this guilt between what we should have done and what we actually did. And so this whole contentment pursuit just kind of goes down the drain in the process of that. The other thing I think that is out there is that this idea of that there's nothing wrong with being discontented is the norm. Okay, that it's not the exception. Let me see if I can prove this. One of the, I think one of the best musical scores that's come out in a long time was to the movie The Greatest Showman, for those of you who have watched that on television. But square in the middle of that movie, Jenny Lind, the opera star who's been successful everywhere, sings this song, Never Enough. And it's really a metaphor for not only P.T. Barnum, who's had this great success with the circus, but it wasn't enough. And she, who has enjoyed these sellout crowds and fame from everywhere, will never, never, never be enough. And even just sings that in the movie itself. Now, if that's too recent, who is this? Extra credit if you know her full name. Veruca Salt. I had to look up the Salt part. I didn't remember her last name. But Veruca Salt, And you realize in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, she is very much the indulged, spoiled child who's presented in there's no bones about that, identifiable across the room. And just a little clip of her conversation goes something like this, and this is Veruca. By the way, Veruca is the Latin word for wart. So if from now on when you watch that movie, you may think that's an appropriate name for her. But she says, "Hey, Daddy, I want an Oompa Loompa. I want you to get me an Oompa Loompa right away." And her dad says, "All right, Veruca, all right. I'll get you one before the day is out." And then she whines and she says, "I want an Oompa Loompa now. I want a party with roomfuls of laughter, 10,000 tons of ice cream. And if I don't get the things I'm after, I'm going to scream." Now that's laid out there, for us to say, okay, is that the way we want our children to behave, or not? How about this one? Who is this? Who is that? Dudley Dursley from the Harry Potter series. And this, you remember in the Sorcerer's Stone, the birthday party, he says, "How many gifts are there?" And his dad says, 36. I counted them myself. And he says, 36, but last year I had 37. So again, just even what our kids grow up with and they see, this is, out there as being, okay, do we imitate this or do we not? If you're more on the literature side and you're a Steinbeck fan, you can go to this novel, The Winter of Our Discontent, which some would consider equal to The Grapes of Wrath, if that's your bent to enjoy. But if you remember this story, the man who's the central character here really sacrifices his values to try to regain his aristocratic social position. And in the process, he cheats his boss, his best friend dies, he manipulates the community, and in the end, even his search for contentment and all of that leaves him so discontented that he is on the verge of suicide. So we see it in literature, but we don't want to leave anybody out. Who's that? Tom Brady. You'll remember the interview June 2005, 60 Minutes, correspondent Steve Croft, in that conversation with him, was asking him about his success on and off the field. Some of you will remember this. This is what Brady said. "There are times where I'm not the person that I want to be. Why do I have 3 Super Bowl rings and still think there's something greater out there for me? I mean, maybe a lot of people would say, hey man, this is what it is. I reached my goal, my dream, my life. Me, I think, God, it's got to be more than this. I mean, this can't be what it's all cracked up to be. I mean, I've done it. I'm 27, and what else is there for me?" And then the interviewer says, "What's the answer?" And Brady says, "I wish I knew." Contentment is elusive, and yet we've got all of this that's going on out there. So how do we balance this cultural insistence that if we have more, we're going to satisfy that need. It's going to fill that gap. A couple of observations here, and then we'll try to nail down some things that we can do specifically. If we're talking about shalom, I think it helps for us to think that it's independent of circumstances. If you think about that for a minute, that it's independent. That if we wrote up here circumstance and put absolute value signs around it, that we have to grow to the point that we look at circumstance as not positive or negative. It just is what it is. And in the moment, it's ours to deal with. And our response to that is what we're in charge of. It takes time to learn that. I mean, we don't just say one day, okay, I got it all figured out and do it. We have to try and fail and try and fail. And sometimes it really takes being willing to lose something that's really important, something that we really want, really desperately, to let go of that, to turn loose of that, in order to take the emotion out of finding that place of contentment. So shalom, I think, has to be independent of circumstances. It has to be independent of the future. Shalom, contentment, is about where we are right now. How many times have we said, and I'm guilty of this, I think it's going to be a better day when I have this, or when this project is finished, or when I get to go here and I'll have done that, and then it'll be over and I can check that box, and then everything's going to be a whole lot better at that point. That's all future. That's all dependent on the future. So it's almost like we have to substitute in our thinking the when this happens to the now. Okay, this is where I am. Tomorrow may not come. That may never happen. I don't need to borrow trouble. I don't need to worry about that. This is what I have to deal with at the moment. So I'm going to throw out when, and I'm going to replace it with now, so that all my energy, all my attention, all my focus gets poured in to the moment. There are all kinds of psychology terms for this: mindfulness, being fully present, whatever term you want to use. I say it's just now. We just live in the now as far as this goes. I think it has to be independent of comparison. Brad, I think, gave us that word that's up here. I have a granddaughter who's interested in pole vaulting. And when I was thinking about this, I thought, okay, maybe to some degree, pole vaulting is a metaphor for this, because if I choose to compete in a pole vaulting event and the only motivation I have is to beat everybody else around me, that's almost a no-win situation, because the bar keeps getting moved up until I can't cross it. So it just keeps moving until it's beyond my reach. On the other hand, if I compete against myself, okay, this is my skill set. This is how much I can go today. Can I do more tomorrow? Can I prepare tomorrow? How do I prepare myself to compete against only me? Then I can be content with that if I've done my best, if I did what I needed to do. And regardless of how I finish, win or lose, whoever else is around me, I can find shalom. I can find contentment. And then I think it has to be independent of extremes. Shalom has to replace the more strategy with enough strategy. Okay, that what I need is enough. I don't need more than, I just need enough. We can thank Proverbs for this reminder, tucked away. Keep falsehood and lies from me. Okay, don't tell me that I need more. Just give me neither extreme, poverty or riches, either way. Just give me what I need today. Otherwise, if I have too much, I'm going to be real tempted to say I did it all myself. And you didn't have anything to do with it. And to dishonor you in that way is sure to not find shalom. Or to go the other way. I may be so poor and so desperate that I steal in order to satisfy the need. And if I do that, I'm going to dishonor you. So, don't give me the extremes. Just give me enough. Honestly think if that became our guiding, our driving principle, that contentment would seem so much closer to us than it does. All right, so how do we teach it? Well, I'm going to, it may be up here. Delayed gratification becomes one of the things. Those of you who remember the marshmallow test, kids, this is all kinds of varieties on this test since it was first attempted. But in general, child's in the room, marshmallow or whatever they like to eat is on the plate. The examiner comes in and says, okay, you can have it if you want it, but if you don't eat it until I get back, I'll give you 2. And so they leave the room, and then the video camera's on. And so for the next 10 or 15 minutes, it's watching how kids react. Some of them will sing, some of them will drum their fingers, some of them walk around doing really whatever they think they can do to avoid eating it, and others will eat it as soon as they're out of the room. The idea was to try to decide whether or not kids who were able to delay that impulse to eat it would actually fare better as time went on. The initial results were rave reviews that made a difference. As time goes on, there have been variables in there where it's not quite as impressive as it was first cut out to be. But the idea, the concept is there. And that is, can we teach our children to not be impulsively demanding the Verucas, the Dudleys, who need it all right now? I think the second thing that we would want to talk about is, and I realize this is arguable, but I'm going to lay it out here anyway, that having privilege and choosing not to exercise it is a door into shalom. Someone said entitlement up here. It's sort of that concept that maybe I can do something. Maybe I have the means to do something. But choosing not to do it may in its own way give me a sense of contentment that I can't find by pushing to do everything that I could do in the way of privilege. Now I realize that may be debatable, and there may be facets to that wouldn't hold up under scrutiny. But I think it's an effort to say, I don't always have to play the one-upsmanship game. Because that I can step back. I can celebrate others. And in the process of doing that, it takes it out of a competitive mode. And I can be still, and I can be peaceful, and I can enjoy what I have, and I can enjoy what you have in the process. I think another one is, Paul tells us this in Romans 12, not to think of ourselves more highly than we ought. Sort of tangential here, but that's a lesson that is sort of hard for us to help kids learn, and it has to be a process as time goes on, that we don't get into this I deserve more mode, the Veruca voice again, because if we're not careful, that takes us all the way to greed. Or we get locked into this I desire more, and so that entitlement, I really want it and I can have it. And if we're not careful with that one, it moves beyond those boundaries and we get into coveting what someone else has. I want what you have. And then the next step is envy, and that is, I don't want you to have it. So we have to watch the trajectory. Not that all of this is wrong, but I'm just laying it out there to say these are the things that we can be mindful about. I think it's worth enjoying the journey, teaching them to enjoy the process as they go along. It's like going from here to New York City. If I fly, I get on a plane at the airport, I get off in New York City, I have no idea what was in between. If I'm on the train, I see everything along the way. I get to experience it. If I don't get to New York, I still had a great journey, a great experience trying to get there. The last one I would mention here, I was going to mention this, but I'll skip on, is that we need to help our children deal with disappointment, okay? The disappointment of needing to be unselfish, okay? Tell you a little story. Third child, second daughter, Anna, when she was about 3, was getting ready to go to Guyana, and we always pack a suitcase of treats for kids. You know how that goes in the clinics because you give them something that they can't get otherwise. So we load this up, and she comes toddling in. She's about 3 years old, and she looks at it. She studies it for a minute, and she says, I am so glad that you're taking this candy to the children in Guyana. Whew. I thought, 3 years old, we have made it. We have got this concept down. She leaves and then turns around and looks back, and she said, because I know when you come home, you'll bring me some. And I thought, okay, we got a long way to go here on this. But that whole, how do you help your children be unselfish and not be disappointed in the process? Quick story. Let me show you this. Anybody remember this? Are any of you old enough to remember the Sears Roebuck catalog? And how the back, when it would come, the last about, 75 65 pages or so, and the Christmas catalog were all toys. You remember that? Well, for some of you, Thanksgiving may be the beginning of the holiday season. For me, it was when this catalog came, because it was a matter of just studying those pages and dog-earing them and copying the exact item number on the letter to Santa because you wanted to be sure and get it right. And so writing that letter, the process was I gave it to my dad. And he was the one, he would always say, well, I'll be sure Santa gets this. And then ever so often he would tack on this sentence that I thought, oh, please don't say it, please don't say it. And he always would. And it's, just remember, it's better to give than it is to receive. And then he'd walk away and he would just leave that hanging to try to, okay, what do I do with that? You know, how do I make this match up? Because what it said in my mind was, it's okay for me to give these things to somebody else, but it's not okay for me to have them. Now, right or wrong, good or bad, that's what I was left with, to try to figure that out. And it really wasn't until much later, and he was very wise to not dwell on it. He didn't hammer it. He just said it and went on. But it was a long time before I could realize what he was trying to say, in that there are some gifts that are mutually beneficial to both the one who gives it and the one who receives it. And probably at the top of that list, and the one that's easiest to teach our kids, is gratitude. It's just simple thank you. It doesn't have to be wrapped up. It's not a seasonal gift. It can be done spontaneously. It can be shared with anybody, anywhere, anytime. And I really think what he was saying is, I hope one of these days you're going to figure it out. And he just sort of left it. So if we say all of that, then what we're saying again is we're back to what I put up here probably more times than I should have, but it's what we keep coming back to. C1, that's us. We're demonstrating it. Do one, that's letting them do it, monitoring how they do it. And then teach one, and that's turning them loose to replicate that whole process. So if we're going to talk about how to teach contentment, we're going to have to be the ones in the driver's seat to do that. I don't know what you think of when you see this, but really this is what we're talking about. We got the wheel of fortune. Those are good things that happen to us, things that we really love, we feel good about. We've got the wheel of misfortune. Those are the things that we would never ask for, but they just come to us anyway. And they're turning all the time, just like gears. And the problem is, we're stuck right where the gears meet. And so if that goes on long enough and we don't change our approach or our attitude to this, sooner or later we just get ground to dust. Because we're not content. We're not in a state of shalom. And so it makes it impossible for them to see it here, and certainly impossible for them to do it here. So how do we resolve that? Can we do this? Can we separate the wheel of fortune and the wheel of misfortune, knowing that they're going to keep spinning, that they're going to come to us? But by separating them, by deciding that we can live with whatever it is, being in the middle and being content with whatever that may be, then we step out of that continual grinding tension that just wears us down. I don't know if that resonates or not, but it in my mind, there has to be a place where we step out of all the worry and just decide that it's okay for us to manage whatever it is that comes our way. I want to close tonight with words from your good friend, my good friend, Bruce McClarty. This is a story some of you have heard before, But I thought it really fits well tonight when we talk about how we resolve this. You'll remember in the early 1980s, the McClartys, they were a very young family at that time, and when they were in Meru, Kenya. Both girls were very, very young at that time. They lived in a concrete block house. It had running Spartan to us, but by all comparisons, they were very well-to-do in the culture. In 1984, while they were there, Kenya was suffering from a severe drought. The crop failures were imminent. Starvation was really they were on the cusp of that. And they worshiped with a congregation out in the bush. And on one Sunday, they weren't able to be there. And so one of the men from the congregation came in to check on them. And Bruce said they were sitting on the front porch drinking chai, which would have been their expression of hospitality, the tea there. And Bruce asked him, he said, did the church pray for rain yesterday? And the man's name, who was Serafino, says, yes, we prayed for rain. And Bruce said, well, I want you to know that we prayed for rain as well. And then Serafino just looked down and he said, a rich man cannot pray for rain. When the rains don't come, he still has money to buy food for his children. No, a rich man can't pray for rain. And I asked Bruce later, I said, so what do you do with that? Bruce said to him, this was a message from God. I said, what do you do with that when you've been indicted like that? And he wrote back to me in an email. He said, I knew he was right. I may have been a missionary, but I was more secure in my money than in my God. If the rains did not come, I would not go hungry, and I knew it. After all these years, I'm still dealing with his insight. The voice of Serafino reminds me every day to look for the opportunity to use my wealth to bless those in need. Serafino had raised the question, do you find shalom in money in the bank, food in the pantry, water for the garden, clothes in the closet, locks on the door? Is that where it comes from? Or do we find shalom believing that God's hand is still on our shoulder when our job is terminated, when there are no leftovers in the refrigerator, when there are holes in the soles of our shoes, when the storms leave us without power, when there's a shooting in a school nearby? Do we teach our children to seek shalom regardless of what's going on, and how we help others find it as well? Well, I think getting into shalom requires us to be aware of our blessings and being willing to share them. And there, I meant to put this up there. That's actually Bruce's words. But here's the summary tonight. If we teach our children that shalom depends on trusting God rather than reacting to circumstances, if we teach them that shalom is learned from experiences that involve sharing, and if we teach them that it's enjoyed most when enough is enough, then we will have taught them well to cultivate contentment. So I would welcome your comments. The bell's going to ring in a minute, but feel free to write whatever's on your mind, send it, and I'll be happy to try to respond to it if we can. Again, I don't think I missed anything in this list. I think most of what we talked about is there. You may have some more thoughts. You may have something else that's come to mind tonight. Or you may feel that there needs to be more discussion about some of this. I hope if you do that you'll let me know. Anyway, thank you all for being here. Thank you all online for tuning in. And we'll see you next week. I think we have one more week. Then we have Thanksgiving break. And then we have just a couple after that. And then, believe it or not, the semester is over. So enjoy the week, and we'll see you next time.